Sometimes destiny does not knock on the door. Sometimes it arrives with glowing eyes in the middle of the night. The first howl echoed across Black Pine Hollow just before midnight, rolling through the towering pines like distant thunder. Then came another, and another. Within minutes, every lantern in the tiny mountain village flickered to life as frightened families peered through frosted windows. They expected a hunting pack searching for prey. Instead, dozens of enormous black wolves emerged from the forest and moved together with perfect discipline, ignoring livestock, ignoring frightened villagers, ignoring every tempting distraction along the snowy road. Their only destination was a lonely wooden cabin standing at the edge of the woods. The villagers watched in stunned silence as the wolves surrounded the small home without making a single threatening move. Their powerful bodies formed a quiet circle while their golden eyes remained fixed upon the weathered front door. Nobody dared step outside. Whispers spread from house to house. Some believed the forest itself had awakened. Others insisted the wolves were searching for someone to punish. No one imagined they had come looking for help. Inside the cabin, Emily Carter slowly opened her eyes as the distant howls faded into complete silence. At 24 years old, she had grown accustomed to unusual sounds drifting through the forest. Living alone taught her to listen before reacting. She pulled a thick wool blanket around her shoulders, lit a small oil lamp, and crossed the worn wooden floor toward the front window. The warm light revealed dozens of large wolves sitting quietly beyond the porch. None of them growled. None showed their teeth. They simply waited. Emily's heartbeat quickened, yet fear never reached her eyes. Instead, she noticed something unexpected. Every wolf looked exhausted. Snow clung to their thick black fur. Their breathing was slow and heavy after what must have been many miles across frozen mountains. One younger wolf lowered its head toward the porch, as though asking permission rather than demanding attention. Emily gently rested one hand against the window frame. "You are not here to hunt," she whispered to herself. "You are searching for someone." She placed another log onto the fireplace before opening a kitchen cabinet. Fresh bread, dried venison, and a pot of warm vegetable stew remained from supper. Without hesitation, she filled several wooden bowls and carried them outside one by one. The cold air wrapped around her as the wolves watched every careful movement. Not one stepped forward until she quietly placed the final bowl upon the snow and retreated several feet. Only then did the oldest wolf slowly approach, sniff the food, and begin eating with remarkable calm. The others followed its example, each waiting patiently instead of competing. Emily smiled softly. "Good manners," she said with quiet amusement. "Someone taught you well." The oldest wolf lifted its head after finishing the meal and walked toward her. It stopped only a few feet away. Its amber eyes searched her face with almost human intelligence before it slowly turned toward the dark forest. After taking several steps, it looked back at her. Then it waited. Emily understood the invitation immediately. "You want me to follow you?" The wolf remained perfectly still. Another howl rose from deeper within the mountains, carrying a note unlike any ordinary call. It sounded urgent, not frightened, not angry, desperate. Emily looked back at her small cabin, then toward the endless forest stretching beneath the moonlight. Every sensible thought urged her to close the door and remain inside until sunrise. Yet something inside her heart refused to ignore the silent plea standing only yards away. She secured her heavy winter coat, gathered a leather satchel filled with herbs, clean bandages, and simple medicines, then quietly locked her cabin door behind her. Without another sound, the wolves began walking into the snowy wilderness. Emily followed their tracks beneath the silver moon, unaware that every step carried her closer to the greatest secret hidden anywhere within the northern kingdom. Emily followed the wolves through the sleeping forest with steady footsteps, her lantern casting a warm circle of light across the snow while the moon illuminated the towering pines. Above, the pack never rushed her. Whenever the trail became steep or tangled with fallen branches, the oldest wolf paused and glanced back to make certain she remained close behind. It was almost as though they understood she was not one of them, yet had accepted her as part of their journey. The deeper they traveled into the wilderness, the quieter the world became. The distant sounds of the village disappeared until only the gentle crunch of snow beneath their boots and paws filled the cold night air. Emily noticed unusual details that most people would never have seen. None of the wolves wandered away from the trail. None hunted the rabbits darting between bushes or the deer quietly grazing beneath frozen branches. Their attention remained fixed upon a destination known only to them. Every few hundred feet, the younger wolves glanced toward the oldest member of the pack before continuing forward, trusting every decision it made, without hesitation. Nearly 2 hours passed before the forest suddenly opened into a hidden valley surrounded by towering cliffs. Ancient cedar trees shielded the clearing from every direction, making it nearly impossible to discover by accident. In the center stood a natural stone shelter, partially covered with snow and hanging vines that had survived the winter. As soon as Emily stepped into the clearing, the wolves spread out silently, creating a protective circle around the entrance while leaving a narrow path open for her alone. Her heartbeat grew faster as she approached. The oldest wolf lowered its head once more, almost encouraging her to continue. Emily lifted her lantern and carefully stepped inside the shelter. The warm glow revealed a man lying peacefully upon a bed of thick evergreen branches covered with heavy wool blankets. He appeared to be in his early 30s with short dark hair and remarkably composed features despite obvious exhaustion. His breathing was slow and uneven, and a light sheen of perspiration covered his forehead. Even without touching him, Emily recognized the signs of a dangerously persistent fever. She knelt beside the stranger and gently rested the back of her hand against his forehead. His skin felt unusually warm despite the freezing mountain air. There were no visible injuries, no signs of a struggle, only overwhelming fatigue that seemed to reach far deeper than ordinary illness. Resting nearby was a finely crafted black cloak fastened with a silver clasp bearing an unfamiliar crest that Emily did not recognize in the dim light. She gave it only a passing glance before returning her attention to the man himself. People mattered more than symbols. Opening her leather satchel, she carefully measured dried willow bark, mountain sage, pine needles, and crushed winter mint into a small iron pot. One of the younger wolves quietly nudged a bundle of dry firewood toward her feet, almost anticipating what she needed next. Emily smiled with gentle surprise. "Thank you," she whispered. The wolf settled beside the entrance, watching peacefully as though it fully understood every word. Soon a small fire crackled softly inside the shelter, filling the air with a comforting scent of herbs as steam slowly rose from the simmering mixture. Emily cooled the herbal tea before carefully helping the unconscious stranger drink a few small sips. His breathing gradually became steadier, though he never opened his eyes. She replaced the damp cloth upon his forehead and pulled the blankets more securely around his shoulders. Outside, the wolves remained perfectly silent beneath the fading stars, standing watch over both the mysterious man and the quiet healer who had answered their unspoken call. Morning light slowly filtered through the cedar branches, painting soft golden patterns across the stone shelter as Emily stirred the last of the herbs simmering inside the small iron pot. She had remained awake through the long winter night, checking the stranger's temperature every hour and replacing the cool cloth resting across his forehead whenever it became warm. Outside, the wolves had not moved far from their silent watch. Some rested upon the snow while others quietly patrolled the edges of the hidden valley, always returning to glance toward the shelter before continuing their careful rounds. Emily stepped outside to gather fresh snow for clean water and noticed something that made her pause. Birds had begun landing among the wolves without fear. Tiny sparrows hopped across the snow only a few feet from the enormous black animals, while a pair of rabbits cautiously emerged from nearby bushes to nibble frozen grass. The entire clearing carried an unusual sense of peace, as though every living creature understood that this place was meant for protection rather than conflict. She smiled gently before returning inside with the fresh water. The stranger remained asleep, although his breathing had become steadier than it had been during the night. His fever had eased slightly, but exhaustion still weighed heavily upon him. Emily carefully mixed another herbal remedy, adding crushed pine needles, dried elderflower, and a small amount of wild honey from a jar she always carried for emergencies. As she prepared the warm drink, the man's fingers moved ever so slightly. His eyes slowly opened for the first time, revealing an extraordinary shade of golden amber unlike any she had ever seen. He looked around the shelter with quiet confusion before his gaze settled upon Emily. Neither of them spoke for several moments. Finally, she offered a reassuring smile. "You have been sleeping for a long time," she said softly. "Your fever is improving, but you should not try to stand yet." The man studied her face with calm curiosity. His voice, though weak, carried quiet confidence. "Did the wolves bring you here?" Emily nodded. "They came to my cabin in the middle of the night. They would not leave until I followed them." A faint expression of surprise crossed his face before quickly disappearing. He accepted the wooden cup she offered and carefully drank the warm herbal mixture. After a few moments, he looked toward the shelter entrance where the oldest wolf quietly appeared, watching him with unmistakable loyalty. The man gave the animal a nearly invisible nod, and the wolf relaxed immediately before lying peacefully beside the doorway. Emily noticed the exchange, but said nothing. Instead, she asked the question that mattered most to her. "Do you remember your name?" He hesitated only briefly before answering.
"Adrian."
It was a simple reply, offering no title and no explanation. Emily accepted it without pressing further. Names were enough for introductions. Stories could wait until strength returned. Throughout the afternoon, Adrian gradually regained enough energy to sit beside the fire while Emily prepared another meal from the bread and dried vegetables remaining in her satchel. They spoke very little, yet the silence between them never felt uncomfortable. Outside, the wolves remained unusually alert. Several lifted their heads at the same moment, listening to something carried by the distant mountain wind. The oldest wolf immediately stood and moved toward the edge of the valley. One after another, the rest of the pack followed. Emily stepped outside beside Adrian and watched as every wolf stared toward the northern ridge, where faint echoes drifted through the forest. They sounded like horses traveling across frozen ground. Adrian's calm expression changed almost imperceptibly as he looked toward the distant sound, and for the first time since awakening, genuine concern appeared in his golden eyes. The sound of approaching horses grew clearer with every passing minute, carried across the frozen ridges by the crisp mountain wind. Emily instinctively gathered her satchel while Adrian remained standing near the shelter entrance, one hand resting lightly against the rough stone wall as though measuring the strength that had slowly returned to him. The wolves became remarkably alert, yet none showed signs of panic. Instead, they quietly spread across the hidden valley, taking positions beneath ancient cedar trees where they remained visible enough to reassure Emily, but concealed enough to watch every possible path leading into the clearing. Adrian looked toward the northern ridge before quietly turning to her. "You should leave before they arrive." Emily gently shook her head. "You are still recovering. I am not walking away while someone needs care." A faint smile appeared across his face, one filled with appreciation rather than surprise. It seemed he was not accustomed to hearing someone refuse his request so calmly. Moments later, several riders emerged between the towering pines. They wore dark winter cloaks dusted with snow from a long journey, their horses breathing heavily after climbing the steep mountain trails. The instant they entered the clearing, every wolf stepped forward together. No growls echoed through the valley. No chaos followed. The pack simply stood as one silent barrier between the strangers and the shelter. The riders immediately stopped, lowering themselves from their horses with visible respect rather than fear. The man leading the group removed his hood, revealing silver streaks in his dark hair and the composed expression of someone carrying tremendous responsibility. His eyes swept across the wolves before settling upon Emily, then finally upon Adrian. Relief softened his face so completely that he stood motionless for several seconds. "Your Majesty," he said quietly, bowing his head with profound respect. Emily turned toward Adrian in complete surprise. Her mind struggled to connect the humble man she had spent 2 days caring for with the words she had just heard. Adrian answered with a small nod. "Captain Nathan Hayes. You found us." The captain smiled for what appeared to be the first time in many days. "The entire kingdom has been searching." Every healer believed you had vanished beyond the northern border. We followed the wolves, but they refused every trail until yesterday. Then suddenly, they began leaving signs that even our scouts could recognize. Nathan slowly looked toward Emily once more. Now I understand why. Emily remained speechless. She glanced at Adrian, remembering the elegant black cloak, the unfamiliar silver crest, the remarkable discipline of the wolves, and the quiet authority hidden beneath his gentle voice. Every unanswered question suddenly found its place. Adrian was not merely a traveler named Adrian. He was the Alpha King of the Northern Kingdom. Embarrassment briefly crossed her face as she remembered speaking to him so casually beside the fire, offering simple meals in worn wooden bowls, asking whether he remembered his own name, as though he were any ordinary stranger. Adrian noticed her expression and quietly smiled. You treated me exactly as I needed to be treated, not as a king, as a man who needed help. His words eased the tension almost immediately. Captain Hayes carefully approached only after the oldest wolf stepped aside, silently granting permission. Even then, every member of the pack continued, watching with unwavering attention. Nathan lowered one knee before Adrian once again before speaking in a respectful voice. The council feared the wolves would never trust another soul after your disappearance. Yet they chose to guide us only after she came here. Adrian slowly turned toward Emily, his golden eyes filled with quiet admiration. They trusted her before anyone else did. Emily looked around the peaceful valley, where dozens of magnificent wolves now rested calmly beneath the winter sunlight. For the first time, she realized they had never truly come to her cabin searching for a healer. Long before the kingdom understood what was happening, they had already recognized the one person their king would need most. By late afternoon, the hidden valley had become unexpectedly peaceful. The royal guards unpacked blankets, fresh food, and medical supplies from their horses, yet none of them crossed the invisible boundary surrounding Adrian until the wolves quietly stepped aside. Captain Nathan Hayes noticed the silent pattern immediately. Every decision still belonged to the pack, and strangely, the pack seemed to take its cues from Emily. Whenever she walked toward Adrian with a fresh cup of herbal tea or another bundle of medicinal leaves, the wolves relaxed as if they had already accepted her as part of their family. Nathan watched the scene with quiet amazement. During the past week, the finest healers from every province had been summoned to the capital. Some carried rare medicines gathered from distant mountains. Others claimed ancient knowledge passed through generations. None of them had managed to approach the Alpha King without the wolves becoming restless and leading him farther into the wilderness. Yet this young woman from a forgotten cabin had earned their complete trust in less than 2 days simply by offering kindness without expecting anything in return. Emily continued her work without paying attention to the growing curiosity surrounding her. She examined Adrian's pulse, prepared another mixture of herbs, and encouraged him to eat a little more bread with warm vegetable broth. His strength had noticeably improved. Color slowly returned to his face, and the exhaustion clouding his golden eyes had begun to fade. As evening approached, Adrian walked a short distance beyond the shelter with Emily beside him. The wolves followed several yards behind, allowing them a rare moment of quiet conversation. Snow reflected the fading sunlight until the valley glowed with soft shades of gold and silver. Adrian looked toward the peaceful forest before speaking. You never asked why the wolves trusted you. Emily smiled gently. I thought they would tell me when they were ready. Adrian laughed quietly, the sound carrying warmth that had been absent since she first met him. Most people would have demanded an explanation. Emily brushed a few snowflakes from her sleeve. Animals rarely choose without reason. I simply believed there was one that I did not understand yet. Adrian looked at her with thoughtful admiration. My father used to say that wolves recognize a person's heart long before people recognize each other. Emily lowered her eyes with modesty. I only did what anyone should have done. Adrian slowly shook his head.
No.
You did what very few people actually would have done. Before Emily could answer, one of the younger wolves suddenly trotted toward them carrying something carefully between its teeth. The animal stopped in front of Adrian and gently placed a beautifully carved leather pouch upon the snow before stepping back. Adrian opened it, and quietly smiled. Inside rested a polished silver pendant shaped like a crescent moon. "It belonged to my mother," he explained. "The wolves have protected it since I became separated from my escort." He held the pendant in his hand for several moments before turning toward Emily. "I would like you to keep it." Emily immediately stepped back. "I cannot accept something so valuable." Adrian closed her fingers gently around the pendant with sincere gratitude rather than royal authority. "Its value has never been measured by silver. It reminds people that true guidance often comes from unexpected places. My wolves protected it until they found the person who deserved to carry it." Emily looked down at the small moon resting in her palm while the surrounding wolves quietly lowered their heads. Captain Hayes witnessed the moment from a respectful distance and understood something that no council meeting or royal decree could ever explain. The Alpha King had not simply recovered his strength in the hidden valley. He had rediscovered the kind of trust that could never be earned through titles, wealth, or power, because the first heart chosen by his loyal wolves had also become the first heart he truly wished to honor. The following morning dawned clear and bright as the last traces of winter clouds drifted beyond the northern peaks. Sunlight spilled into the hidden valley, reflecting across untouched snow until the entire clearing shimmered with quiet warmth. Adrian stood outside the stone shelter without assistance for the first time since Emily had found him. Although he was not yet fully recovered, his posture carried the quiet confidence of a leader whose strength was steadily returning. The wolves gathered around him, yet something had changed. Instead of watching only their king, their eyes often turned toward Emily, as though seeking her approval before settling back into peaceful silence. Captain Nathan Hayes noticed the change immediately. During years of loyal service, he had witnessed the extraordinary bond between Adrian and the royal wolves, but never had he seen them extend such unquestioning trust to another person. Even when members of the royal household approached, the wolves remained cautious. Around Emily, they rested comfortably, allowed children from nearby woodland cottages to approach the edge of the clearing without concern, and even accepted food directly from her hands. Nathan quietly remarked to one of the guards, "Trust cannot be ordered. It must be recognized." The guard nodded, unable to take his eyes from the remarkable sight unfolding before them. Emily spent the morning preparing fresh medicinal tea from herbs growing beneath the sheltering cedars, where winter had begun releasing its grip. Adrian joined her, carefully helping gather leaves and filling a small wooden bucket with spring water flowing from a nearby stream. She smiled with gentle amusement. "I did not expect a king to help collect herbs." Adrian returned the smile. "I did not expect a healer to treat a stranger before asking who he was." Their laughter echoed softly through the valley, drawing curious glances from the wolves, who wagged their tails with unmistakable contentment. After they returned to the shelter, Nathan approached Adrian carrying several sealed messages delivered by fast riders from the capital. The council requested his immediate return. Neighboring territories had begun asking questions about the king's disappearance, while merchants delayed important agreements until they received confirmation of his safety. Adrian quietly read each letter before folding them carefully and placing them aside. "We will leave tomorrow morning," he said calmly. Nathan agreed, although he noticed Adrian's eyes drifting toward Emily, who was arranging fresh herbs upon a flat stone to dry in the afternoon sunlight. Later that day, Emily packed the few remaining supplies from her satchel, believing her work was nearly finished. She had never expected anything in return for helping a stranger, and now that Adrian had recovered, she intended to return to her quiet cabin before nightfall. As she secured the leather straps, the oldest wolf walked toward her carrying a sturdy walking staff carved from polished cedar wood. Delicate patterns of wolves, pine branches, and crescent moons had been carefully etched along its length. The magnificent animal gently laid it at her feet before lowering its head. Emily looked at Adrian with surprise. He smiled softly. "That staff has traveled beside the leaders of the royal pack for generations. They have never offered it to anyone outside the kingdom's guardians." Emily hesitated. "I have done nothing extraordinary." Adrian stepped closer, his golden eyes filled with quiet sincerity. "You reminded every one of us that kindness does not become greater because a crown receives it. Kindness is already great when it is offered freely." As Emily accepted the carved staff, every wolf in the valley rose together. One after another, they lowered their heads toward her in complete silence. No command had been spoken. No signal had been given. Even Nathan Hayes stood speechless as he realized the wolves had chosen to honor Emily of their own free will. Adrian watched the moment unfold with profound gratitude, understanding that before his people could ever fully trust her, the oldest guardians of the kingdom already had. The journey back to the capital began beneath a sky so clear that every distant mountain seemed close enough to touch. Emily walked beside the royal procession only until the forest path divided, where the narrow trail leading home disappeared beneath towering pines. She expected a simple farewell before returning to her quiet life, but instead every wolf stopped walking at the same moment. The entire procession came to a respectful halt as the pack turned toward her. Villagers from nearby settlements, who had gathered simply to catch a glimpse of their returning king, watched in astonishment as the royal wolves calmly surrounded Emily once more. There was no fear in the circle they formed. It felt less like a farewell and more like a promise. Adrian stepped forward carrying the carved cedar staff she had received the day before. He placed it gently into her hands once again, ensuring she did not leave without it. "No matter how far this road separates us," he said quietly, "you will always have friends within these forests." Emily smiled with humble gratitude. "Then I hope they remember to visit when spring flowers bloom." A gentle laugh spread among the guards, and even Captain Nathan Hayes allowed himself a warm smile before the procession finally continued toward the capital. Emily watched until the last rider disappeared beyond the hills, while the oldest wolf remained beside her for several moments longer before quietly following its king. Days passed, and Emily returned to the peaceful rhythm of her small cabin. She gathered herbs each morning, cared for injured birds, mended broken fences for elderly neighbors, and welcomed every wandering animal that found its way to her doorstep. She rarely thought about the palace, believing the extraordinary days in the hidden valley had already become a memory. Yet beyond the mountains, the story continued to grow. Throughout the northern kingdom, travelers spoke of the mysterious healer chosen by the royal wolves. Merchants repeated the tale in busy marketplaces. Farmers shared it beside evening fires. Children imagined a brave young woman who could calm even the fiercest guardians with nothing more than kindness. Not everyone welcomed the story. Within the royal court, several nobles questioned how an unknown woman living alone in the woods had gained such remarkable trust. Some believed there had to be a hidden explanation. Others quietly suggested that only someone with unusual influence could inspire such loyalty from creatures famous for recognizing deception. Captain Hayes listened to every conversation without interruption. When one noble finally asked whether the stories had been exaggerated, the captain answered with complete certainty. "If anything, they do not describe enough." I watched the wolves choose her before they accepted the return of any soldier, healer, or advisor. Adrian remained silent during most of these discussions, yet each evening he found himself standing beside the palace windows overlooking the northern forests. The polished silver pendant no longer rested among the royal treasures because he knew exactly where it belonged. More than once he reached for a map of Black Pine Hollow without realizing it. He had governed his kingdom with wisdom for many years, but now he understood something he had never fully appreciated before. Respect earned through authority could protect a kingdom. Trust earned through compassion could transform one. One quiet afternoon, while Emily watered the first spring flowers blooming beside her cabin, a familiar howl drifted gently through the trees. She looked toward the forest with a smile already forming before the oldest wolf emerged from the shadows carrying a neatly folded letter sealed with the royal crest. The magnificent animal walked calmly to her porch, placed the letter beside the flower pots, and sat patiently waiting, its amber eyes reflecting the same quiet confidence that had first led her into the mountains. Emily carefully broke the seal, unaware that the words waiting inside would soon change not only her future, but the future of the entire kingdom. Emily unfolded the letter with careful hands while the oldest wolf remained quietly beside her porch. The elegant handwriting carried only a few simple lines, yet every word reflected sincerity rather than royal ceremony. Adrian invited her to attend the spring renewal celebration at the capital as his honored guest, explaining that the entire kingdom deserved to know the truth about the woman who had reminded its king what compassion truly looked like. Emily read the letter twice before gently folding it again. She had never imagined entering the capital, much less attending a royal celebration. Her first instinct was to decline. She had always believed kindness should remain quiet, expecting nothing in return. Yet when she looked into the patient amber eyes of the wolf waiting beside her, she realized this invitation was not about receiving praise. It was about allowing others to see that goodness could appear in the most ordinary places. Several days later, dressed in her familiar blue dress with a freshly mended gray shawl, Emily traveled toward the capital accompanied by Captain Nathan Hayes and the royal wolves. As they approached the city gates, thousands of spring flowers decorated every street while colorful banners fluttered above smiling crowds. Families gathered along the roads, curious to see the mysterious healer they had heard about for weeks. To Emily's surprise, the people welcomed her with warm smiles rather than suspicious whispers. Children waved enthusiastically as the wolves walked calmly beside her, and elderly couples nodded with quiet respect. Inside the palace courtyard, nobles, merchants, soldiers, craftsmen, and villagers stood together beneath bright blue skies, waiting for the ceremony to begin. Adrian stepped onto the stone platform wearing his black royal cloak, but instead of taking his place upon the raised throne prepared for him, he walked down the steps until he stood among the people. The unexpected gesture drew complete silence across the courtyard. Adrian looked toward Emily with a gentle smile before extending his hand. She approached with understandable hesitation, uncertain why the king himself had stepped away from the throne. As soon as she reached him, something remarkable happened. Every royal wolf calmly entered the courtyard and formed a wide circle around them. The crowd watched in breathless amazement as the magnificent animals lowered themselves peacefully onto the stone ground, their attention fixed entirely upon Emily. Adrian turned to face his people. Many believed these wolves served only a king. He began in a calm voice that carried across the courtyard. But they have taught me something greater. They do not follow power alone. They follow truth, compassion, and the courage to help a stranger without asking for a reward. He looked toward Emily with unmistakable gratitude. When I could no longer protect this kingdom, she protected its king without knowing who I was. She asked for no title. She expected no payment. She simply chose kindness. The courtyard remained perfectly silent before Adrian reached into his cloak and removed a beautifully crafted silver medallion engraved with a cedar tree surrounded by wolves beneath a crescent moon. Instead of placing it around Emily's neck immediately, he first bowed his head respectfully before her. A quiet gasp swept through the gathered crowd as nobles, soldiers, and merchants witnessed their king honoring an ordinary healer with genuine humility. Adrian carefully placed the medallion around her neck and smiled. Today I honor not only Emily Carter, but every quiet act of compassion that changes lives long before anyone notices. For a heartbeat, the entire courtyard remained still. Then applause rose like spring rain across the capital. People cheered not because a king had spoken, but because they recognized the truth standing before them. Emily lowered her eyes with humble gratitude while the wolves remained peacefully at her side, their calm presence reminding everyone that the greatest strength had never been found in authority alone. It had always been found in the simple courage to care for another soul. Spring gradually transformed Black Pine Hollow into a place overflowing with color and quiet life. Wildflowers covered the hillsides where snow had rested only weeks before, birds filled the morning air with cheerful songs, and the small wooden cabin once again became a peaceful refuge for every injured creature that wandered from the forest. Although the entire kingdom now knew Emily Carter's name, very little about her daily life changed. She still gathered herbs before sunrise, still repaired broken fences for elderly neighbors, and still placed bowls of fresh water outside her porch for tired travelers and thirsty animals. The silver medallion Adrian had placed around her neck rested inside a small wooden box near her fireplace. She wore it only on special occasions because she believed the honor belonged not to her alone, but to every simple choice that had led her to help a stranger in need. Far away in the capital, Adrian fulfilled his responsibilities with renewed purpose. The council noticed subtle but meaningful changes throughout the kingdom. New healing gardens were established in every province so that even the smallest villages could receive proper care. Royal messengers were instructed to assist isolated communities rather than simply deliver announcements. The king often reminded his advisors that a strong kingdom was measured not only by its walls or its armies, but by how kindly it treated those who had the least. Captain Nathan Hayes smiled each time he heard those words because he knew exactly where they had first taken root. Despite the distance between the palace and Black Pine Hollow, Adrian never allowed many weeks to pass without returning to the quiet forest that had changed his life. He always arrived without grand ceremonies or large escorts. Often only Captain Hayes and several familiar wolves accompanied him. The villagers gradually became accustomed to seeing the Alpha King helping Emily gather herbs, repairing the roof of her little cabin after a summer storm, or carrying baskets of fresh vegetables from nearby farms. To the people watching from a respectful distance, he looked less like a ruler visiting a subject and more like an old friend returning to a place where he could simply be himself. One warm evening, as the sun settled behind the mountains, Adrian and Emily walked together toward the hidden valley where they had first met. The cedar trees stood taller than ever, and the stone shelter remained untouched, preserved by the wolves as though it had become part of their own history. The oldest wolf approached them with slow, confident steps before gently resting beside the entrance. Several younger wolves soon joined, lying peacefully beneath the fading golden light. Adrian looked around the quiet valley before turning toward Emily. "The kingdom often thanks me for leading these wolves," he said softly. "But the truth is that they led me where I needed to go." Emily smiled as she looked across the peaceful clearing. Sometimes the wisest guides never speak at all. Adrian nodded with quiet agreement. They stood together in comfortable silence while the evening breeze carried the scent of cedar and wildflowers through the valley. Above them, the first stars slowly appeared across the clear sky, just as they had on the night the wolves first arrived outside her cabin. Nothing about that moment felt accidental anymore. It felt like the gentle unfolding of a path that had always existed, waiting for two kind hearts to discover it. Long after stories of kings, councils, and royal celebrations faded into history, families throughout the Northern Kingdom continued telling one simple tale to their children. They spoke of a humble healer who opened her door without fear, of loyal wolves who recognized compassion before anyone else, and of a king who learned that the greatest crown he could ever wear was the trust of those who believed kindness was stronger than power. And deep within Black Pine Hollow, where the forest remained forever peaceful, the wolves still returned whenever the cabin lights glowed at sunset, because some places are not remembered for the people who rule them. They are remembered for the hearts that make everyone feel at home.